December 1944. The war in Europe was supposed to be over by Christmas. American and British forces had swept across France following D-Day, liberating Paris, pushing the Germans back toward the Rhine. The Allied commanders believed Nazi Germany was on its last legs, disorganized, demoralized, defeated. They were catastrophically wrong. In the pre-dawn darkness of December 16, 1944, Adolf Hitler launched his most desperate gamble, a massive counteroffensive through the same Ardennes forest where his panzers had stunned the world in 1940. Over 200,000 German troops, supported by more than 1,000 tanks and assault guns, smashed into a thinly held sector of the American line. The goal was audacious: drive all the way to Antwerp, splitting the Allied armies in two and forcing them to negotiate a separate peace. Standing directly in their path was a small Belgian town that most Americans had never heard of. Its name was Bastogne. Bastogne was hardly impressive, a market town of just 4,000 people in peacetime. But it controlled something precious in the densely forested Ardennes highlands, a junction where 7 critical roads converged. For the Germans to reach Antwerp before the Allies could regroup, they needed those roads. Without Bastogne, their mechanized forces would be forced onto narrow forest tracks, vulnerable to counterattack. In other words, Bastogne was the key to the entire offensive. But the Americans holding this sector were spread dangerously thin. The 28th Infantry Division, battle-weary after months of continuous combat, was using the quiet Ardennes as a rest area. Intelligence had dismissed the possibility of a major German attack through such difficult terrain. When the assault came, it was devastating. At 5:30 a.m. on December 16th, 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire along an 80-mile front. For 90 minutes, shells rained down on American positions. Then came the tanks and infantry, wave after wave of them, backed by fresh divisions Hitler had held in reserve for this very moment. The 28th Infantry Division fought desperately, but they were being overwhelmed. Small groups of American soldiers made heroic stands at crossroads and river crossings, destroying lead tanks, blowing bridges, anything to slow the German juggernaut. They were buying time for reinforcements to reach Bastogne. On December 17th, one day after the German attack began, Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower made a critical decision. He ordered 2 elite divisions, the 101st and 82nd Airborne, to rush north from their rest camps near Reims, France. The 101st, the famed Screaming Eagles, were told to seize and hold Bastogne at all costs. There was just one problem. Their commanding officer, Major General Maxwell Taylor, was back in the United States. Command fell to his artillery commander, Brigadier General Anthony C. McAuliffe. McAuliffe was no glory hound. The 46-year-old West Point graduate was known for his cool competence and unpretentious manner. He didn't curse like other generals. His most colorful expression was a simple, "nuts." That word would soon become immortal. The 101st made the journey in open trucks, racing through freezing temperatures. They had been pulled out of rest so quickly that many lacked proper winter equipment. No time for cold weather gear, no time for proper briefings. Just go. Get to Bastogne. Hold it. They arrived on December 18th, just 4 hours before the lead German units. McAuliffe immediately set his men to work establishing a defensive perimeter around the town. He was joined by Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division, tank destroyer battalions, and stragglers from units that had been shattered in the initial German assault. In all, about 18,000 American troops prepared to face more than 100,000 Germans closing in from multiple directions. On December 20th, the German noose tightened. Bastogne was completely surrounded. The siege had begun. For the trapped Americans, the situation was desperate. The Germans had cut all roads into Bastogne. Supplies of ammunition, food, and medical equipment were running dangerously low. Wounded men lay in makeshift aid stations with inadequate supplies to treat them. And it was cold. Brutally, bone-achingly cold. Many soldiers still wore the light uniforms they'd been issued for the autumn campaign. They wrapped themselves in blankets, curtains, anything they could scavenge from abandoned Belgian homes. But McAuliffe was no ordinary commander. Despite being outnumbered 5-1, he understood something crucial. His defensive position was actually an advantage. McAuliffe organized his forces in a 360-degree perimeter, with the 333rd Artillery Battalion's guns at the center. This tight defensive circle meant that American artillery could rapidly shift fire to any threatened sector. German attacks coming from one direction could be hammered by guns positioned on the opposite side of the perimeter. The Germans would have to pay in blood for every yard of ground. On December 19th, German forces launched a major assault on the village of Noville, just north of Bastogne. Major William de Sobry's scratch force of 400 men and a handful of tanks held off the entire 2nd Panzer Division, 16,000 men with 120 tanks and assault guns, for 2 crucial days. When de Sobry called his commander to request permission to withdraw, Colonel William Roberts told him to hold the line. Those 48 hours gave the rest of the 101st precious time to solidify their defenses and delayed the German advance on Antwerp by at least 2 days. Similar battles erupted at Longvilly, Verdun, and other villages around the perimeter. American soldiers fought from foxholes and cellars, from behind knocked-out tanks and in shattered buildings. The Germans kept coming, and the Americans kept fighting. By December 22nd, the German commanders were frustrated. Bastogne should have fallen days ago. The entire offensive was behind schedule, giving the Allies time to rush reinforcements to plug the bulge in their lines. General Heinrich Freiherr von Luttwitz, commanding the German forces around Bastogne, decided to try a different approach. Surrender. Just before noon on December 22nd, American soldiers on the southern perimeter spotted an unusual sight. 4 German soldiers approaching under a large white flag. A major, a captain, and 2 enlisted men. Rumors spread quickly along the American lines. The Germans were surrendering. The enemy had had enough. The rumors were dead wrong. The German officers were blindfolded and escorted to a command post. They carried a typewritten message demanding the Americans surrender within 2 hours or face total annihilation from artillery fire that would cause serious civilian losses. The message was rushed up the chain of command to division headquarters in Bastogne, where it was handed to Lieutenant Colonel Ned Moore, the acting chief of staff. Moore entered McAuliffe's sleeping quarters and woke the general. "Sir, the Germans have sent some people forward to take our surrender." McAuliffe, still half asleep and climbing out of his sleeping bag, responded with a single word: "Nuts!" He then asked his operations officer to clarify. "They want to surrender?" "No, sir, they want us to surrender." McAuliffe said, "Nuts," again, dropped the message on the floor, and walked out to congratulate a unit that had destroyed a German roadblock that morning. As far as he was concerned, the Germans were taking one hell of a beating. His men could hold out. But of course, the German officers were still waiting for an official reply. They had delivered a formal surrender demand and expected a formal response. Back at headquarters, McAuliffe's staff reminded him that he needed to send something back. The general sat down with pencil and paper and thought for several minutes. "Well, I don't know what to tell them," he admitted. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kennard spoke up. "That first remark of yours would be hard to beat, sir." "What do you mean?" "Sir, you said nuts." The staff erupted in enthusiastic agreement. McAuliffe grabbed the paper and wrote, "To the German commander, nuts, the American commander." Colonel Bud Harper eagerly volunteered to deliver the message personally. He found the two German officers still standing blindfolded in the woods, under guard. "I have the American commander's reply," Harper said, handing them the note. The Germans asked if it was written or verbal. "Written," Harper confirmed. They read it, looked confused, and asked Harper what it meant. Harper's translation was blunt. "It means, go to hell. And I'll tell you something else. If you continue to attack, we will kill every goddamn German that tries to break into this city." The German major and captain saluted stiffly and turned to leave. When news of McAuliffe's reply spread through the American lines, morale soared. Here was a commander who refused to be intimidated, who believed in his men, who wasn't going anywhere. On Christmas Eve, McAuliffe shared the story with his entire division in a special communiqué. In his words, "What's merry about all this, you ask? We're fighting. It's cold. We aren't home. All true. But what has the proud Eagle Division accomplished with its worthy comrades? We have stopped cold everything that has been thrown at us from the north, east, south, and west. We are giving our country and our loved ones at home a worthy Christmas present." But words alone wouldn't save Bastogne. The Germans hadn't made good on their artillery threat, but they launched repeated infantry and tank assaults. The Luftwaffe bombed the town nightly, and inside the perimeter, ammunition was nearly gone. Food was down to 1 meal a day. Medics were running out of morphine and plasma. Wounded men were dying from treatable injuries. The 101st needed a miracle. They were about to get one. 150 miles to the south, Lieutenant General George S. Patton, Jr., old blood and guts, was planning his own offensive toward the Saar River and into Germany itself. His Third Army had just captured Metz and was positioned to strike a decisive blow. Then came the phone call from General Omar Bradley. The German counteroffensive in the Ardennes had created a massive bulge in the Allied lines. Eisenhower wanted Patton to halt his advance, wheel his entire army 90 degrees to the north, and counterattack into the southern flank of the Bulge. The target? Bastogne. What Eisenhower was asking was almost impossible. Moving an entire army, over 100,000 men, with thousands of trucks, tanks, artillery pieces, and supply vehicles, across icy, barely passable roads in the middle of winter would normally take weeks. Eisenhower needed it done in days. But Patton had been preparing for exactly this. Intelligence reports had made him suspicious that the Germans were planning something in the Ardennes. A week before the German attack, he'd ordered his staff to begin drawing up contingency plans. At a meeting in Verdun on December 19th, Patton stunned Eisenhower and the other commanders by announcing he could have 3 divisions on the road within 48 hours. He was as good as his word. By midnight on December 18th, the 4th Armored Division was already moving north. The 80th and 26th Infantry Divisions followed the next day. It was an extraordinary feat of military logistics. 100,000 soldiers with their equipment, pivoting like a massive door on its hinge, racing through some of the worst winter weather Europe had seen in years. Patton drove his men mercilessly, appearing at the front day and night in his open jeep, urging them forward, checking on supplies, ensuring nothing stopped the advance. On Christmas Day, Patton noted in his diary, "A clear, cold Christmas. Lovely weather for killing Germans." But the Germans weren't going to give up Bastogne without a fight. Patton's spearhead, the 4th Armored Division, had to punch through heavily defended German positions while racing against time. The defenders of Bastogne were running out of everything. On December 23rd, the weather finally cleared. The overcast skies that had grounded Allied aircraft for a week gave way to brilliant blue. Almost immediately, the air above Bastogne blossomed with parachutes as C-47 transport planes dropped hundreds of tons of ammunition, food, and medical supplies to the besieged defenders. Then came the fighter bombers, P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings screaming in just above the treetops, hammering German tanks, convoys, and infantry positions. The Germans had lost their weather advantage. Now they would face the full weight of Allied air power. On the ground, Patton's 4th Armored Division was fighting its way north through fierce German resistance. Every village was a battlefield. Every crossroads was defended. German panzer units and infantry threw themselves at the advancing Americans in desperate attempts to stop them. The snow, churned up by tanks and artillery, turned red with blood. But the Americans kept coming. On December 26th, the day after Christmas, Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams led the spearhead of the 37th Tank Battalion toward Bastogne from the village of Assenois. His Sherman tank, nicknamed Cobra King, smashed through the final German defensive positions. At 4:50 p.m., Cobra King made contact with American troops of the 326th Engineer Battalion on the southern edge of the Bastogne perimeter. The siege was broken. When Abrams and his staff were taken to McAuliffe's cramped command post, they received what one officer called a raucous welcome. "They are happy to see us," said Major Edward Bouts, Abrams's executive officer. "Real happy." Patton himself arrived in Bastogne later that day. The corridor his army had opened was, as one officer noted, so narrow you could spit across it. German forces still surrounded the town on 3 sides and would continue attacking for weeks. But the Germans had lost. Their offensive was finished. During the month-long battle for Bastogne, 23,000 Americans were killed, wounded, or went missing. The Germans suffered 25,000 casualties. The town itself was devastated, a moonscape of charred rubble and collapsed buildings. In the frozen forests around Bastogne, the dead lay where they fell. Airborne troops detailed to collect bodies for graves registration found them stacked in piles, Americans in one group, Germans in another. The cold had preserved them like statues. The 101st Airborne alone suffered 341 killed, 1,691 wounded, and 516 missing during their defense of Bastogne. They had been outnumbered, outgunned, surrounded, and nearly out of supplies. But they had held. Members of the division would forever after be known as the Battered Bastards of Bastogne. For their defense of the city, the 101st was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation, one of the highest honors a unit can receive. On December 30th, just 4 days after the relief, General Patton personally awarded McAuliffe the Distinguished Service Cross for his leadership during the siege. McAuliffe's one-word reply to the German surrender demand had become instant legend, appearing in newspapers across America and boosting morale on the home front. When he died in 1975, the New York Times obituary led with that single word: nuts. The Battle of the Bulge continued for another month after Bastogne was relieved, but Hitler's gamble had failed. The American defenders had bought precious time for the Allies to rush reinforcements and organize a coordinated counterattack. By January 25, 1945, the Bulge had been eliminated. The German forces retreated back to the Siegfried Line, having lost thousands of experienced troops and hundreds of irreplaceable tanks. The Battle of the Bulge was the largest and bloodiest single battle fought by the United States in World War II, with over 80,000 American casualties. But it was also the last major offensive the Germans would ever launch. After the Bulge, Nazi Germany could only retreat. The Allies crossed the Rhine in March 1945. By May, Hitler was dead, and Germany surrendered unconditionally. The road to that victory ran through Bastogne. Today, Bastogne remembers. The central square is named Place General McAuliffe. Museums and memorials dot the landscape where young Americans fought and died in the frozen forests. Every year, veterans and their families return to pay tribute. Fewer now than before. Time has taken its toll. But they come to honor the sacrifice made in those dark December days of 1944. The story of Bastogne is not really about generals or grand strategy. It's about ordinary soldiers, clerks and farmers, students and factory workers who found themselves surrounded in a frozen Belgian town and refused to surrender. It's about paratroopers who held foxholes in sub-zero temperatures with inadequate equipment and dwindling supplies. It's about tank crews who charged into German fire knowing they might not return. It's about medics who worked through the night to save wounded men with almost no medical supplies. And it's about a commander who, when offered the chance to surrender honorably, replied with a single word that captured the American spirit perfectly. Nuts. The Germans had mocked the Americans trapped in Bastogne, demanding their surrender, threatening annihilation. They believed the surrounded defenders had no choice. They were wrong. And in the snow-covered forests around that small Belgian town, they learned, at terrible cost, that some soldiers simply will not quit. Some lines cannot be crossed. Some towns cannot be taken. Not without turning the snow red with the blood of those who tried.